And welcome back to the White Pages podcast. Bit of a technical hiccup at the start of the show tonight, but hey, that happens. We are trying something new here on the White Pages podcast. It's a brand new program called Plain Talk, airing every Wednesday at our regular 8 o'clock time slot. I'll be your host for that, and joining me will be a regular rotating panel of exciting new guests, talking about all manner of things from philosophy to religion to science to sociology to politics to all of those dark, little, nasty, serious topics that go bump in the night. The subject for tonight's episode, our inaugural episode, is something very light, something very fun. Is there such a thing as free will? I am joined tonight by a very good friend of mine, Mr. Matthew. If you want to say hi to everybody.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It is wonderful to have you, my good friend. Just make sure everything is running smoothly before we continue, since my internet died as soon as I started streaming tonight. So I guess tonight is just a night of technical glitches, but I mean, what would it be without that? Am I right?
You picked a good first guest. Whether I have anything interesting to say, I'm hard to shut up, so
Well,
we'll get lots of content.
That, I think, is exactly what I want. So, there we go. Okay, and we already got some good viewers. Sky and Lady, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for bearing with my technical problems. And a new friend in the Twitch chat. Let's do this. Welcome to the show. Remember, everybody, that you can watch us, if you're watching us on the VOD or on YouTube, you can watch us live every Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday night at 8 o'clock EST. Just double checking to make sure that everything is working okay. Matt, why don't you tell the fine folks at home a little bit about yourself?
Do you want it in context with this free will stuff to keep it simple, or general stuff?
General for now, as I do some tech. I admit I am sort of using your voice to make sure that things are working.
Awesome. I am a high school physics teacher. I'm 47 years old. I got a late start in college. I didn't go to start college till I was 24, so I started teaching at 30. So I've been teaching for about 17 years. I teach physics. Calculus-based physics at the highest level, and then regular junior physics too, as well as some astronomy. I got into astronomy while I was teaching. Have some fun with that. Gaming is a big part of my life. That's how you and I know each other. I do run and play in lots of games.
Yes. And I was actually thinking about that the other day. I have known you for 8 years.
Wow, nice. Did you meet me as a high school teacher, or
as a high school teacher, when I was a wee lad.
We knew each other a little before you took my class, though, right?
Yeah, because I took your class my junior year, and I joined the tabletop club the first day of my freshman year.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I was like, you weren't an anime kid, were you?
No. But it looks like everything is running smoothly, which is nice after a few starting hiccups. Free will. Why don't you tell me about your background as it relates to the problem of free will? Because we've been sort of talking off and on about this problem, more or less since I've known you.
Yeah, I'm an unusual case. Hold on a second.
No problem.
Cough there. My unusual background has led this to be a very central issue to my life. It's an idea that I've been chasing for a long time. In fact, I sat down with a bunch of elders in the congregation. I spent the age of 10 to 20 as a Jehovah's Witness, and when I left, I did so by explaining this problem to them, not at the time realizing that I wasn't the first person who had this issue. Like, this is something that's been discussed by Western philosophers for 2,000 years. I didn't really know that. I just knew that their definition of free will just couldn't be true. And I had a difficult time getting them to understand I had the same discussion with my father. That was a much longer discussion and a much more involved discussion. Um, so, yeah.
And what congregation were you a part of?
South Portland, Jehovah's Witnesses? Is that
South
what you're
Portland.
looking for?
Yes, actually.
Why would that matter? What, like the actual congregation?
I sort of just meant like the church you were a part of, like the
gotcha,
sect.
gotcha.
Yeah. Didn't actually know that you were originally from South Portland.
Yeah, Portland and South Portland my whole life, straight out of Red Bank over here.
Oh wow.
I need a T-shirt that says that.
That's like legit Portland.
I guess it's all fancy now, but we were literally dirt poor. Like, we didn't have grass, we had dirt. Honestly, that's funny.
Yeah, so your background is as a witness.
Yeah, from the age of 10 to 20. So it's actually a fairly small percentage of my life at this point, but one that has affected me quite a bit.
It was significant.
Those are pretty formative years, I guess.
10 to 20. So were you? Did your family convert into the Witnesses?
No, my father and mother divorced when I was 2. He moved to California. He came back when I was 10, and I sort of, I don't know, maybe just got sucked in because I wanted to know the man or thought his opinion of me was important, and I don't know.
That will happen.
It's a very logical religion. A lot of people don't realize this. They don't have a lot of ceremony. Like, they do some really bad singing. That's about it. And they pray. But other than that, it's all study, study, study. But what they study is the literature that's put out by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and it's fine. Nobody's like being like insidious and trying to be like dark and evil with it. So it's cultish in sort of a slightly less insidious way than like a Jim Jones who's like knows he's full of shit. But it's still a giant daisy chain of logical fallacies that leads to this logical circle that it's difficult to think your way out of. Like, I was 20 and literally sitting at a district convention in Portland, Maine, when I finally found the exit to this logical puzzle, and I'd been searching for a couple of years. I'd been just trying to figure out what was true and what wasn't on my own. And when I finally dawned on me, it must have been something they were saying. I literally grabbed my stuff, got up, and walked out. I haven't been back.
And going out on a limb, that logic puzzle was the problem of evil.
It was certainly central to it. Yeah, there are a bunch of other issues that are tied to it, but it was that. And in fact, when I first got to college, 4 years later, I got married, and my wife, she was from a very educated family, and she got tired of me reading physics books in bed and said, "You need to go to college," and was willing to work while I did that. One of the first semester there, I saw, they make you take a bunch of classes, including a philosophy class, and I was running down the philosophy class list, and there's one that says free will versus determinism, and I swear to God, I thought I was the only person who had ever even questioned the idea that free will might not exist. And I was definitely a freak show in the class. Like, everybody in the class assumed free will was true. I guess they thought it was going to be the easiest day in the world, and it kind of was, because our professor was very cool and crazy, and an old German guy who he had a PhD in philosophy and physics. So
wow,
we went to Metaphysics Town. It was awesome. And one day I got up and, we did like little mini talks, and I explained to them my position, and they actually literally took me, a bunch of them, like 5 or 6 of them, down to the cafeteria after class to make me explain more what was going through my head. So this is a topic I can talk about for a while, and my ideas have evolved. Probably the best thing I got out of being a Jehovah's Witness, other than some public speaking ability, which helps with the teaching, is I don't believe anything dogmatically anymore. If you can convince me that I am wrong, and I am genuinely convinced that I am wrong, I'm okay with that. Like, oh, good. I used to believe I understood everything, right? When I was in, I used to believe that I had the whole thing figured out, and then when you realized that it was wrong, I didn't have anything. So everything that I've built on my own here, I know I'm fallible, totally human. So I think I'm very open to some discussion if we get into that.
I certainly intend to. I've badgered you about it sort of off and on for years and years and years and years and years. Never very seriously. So, your stance on free will, as I understand it, is that it doesn't exist. And I know that's an incredibly oversimplified version of a very complex topic.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot in there.
And I am going to... well, you know, I'm actually not going to say anything, and I'm going to ask you to start pontificating again, and just...
All right. I got places to go with this, for sure.
Yes, yeah.
But feel free to jump in and question at any time.
Certainly, always.
It's super useful. Okay. Look, so first we have to define what free will is, right?
Yes.
And so this is an ancient question, an old one, but it is almost always tied to what's called the problem of evil. And if you can, you might want to throw that up on the screen.
I got it right here. I'll just turn it on.
So let's talk about it in that context for a minute. It really came up. People started throwing around the phrase of free will as a solution to this interesting puzzle, this logical conundrum of a God exists. And by the definition that started with Plato and went to St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas is really where this sort of meets its culmination, right? God exists, and God is all-powerful, all-good, and all-knowing. Right?
Mm-hmm.
God is a perfect being, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes along with that, including these three properties. So if God is all-powerful, if he wanted to, he could stop evil from coming into existence or end evil at any moment, whatever you want to be the evil thing, whatever is decided to be evil. And if he's omnibenevolent, he would not want people to suffer, I guess. He would not want evil to exist. And if he is omniscient, then he knows evil exists, therefore he should, then he'll want to stop it, and then he will stop it, because he is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all good.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so the solution that really comes out of Thomas Aquinas and those who come after him is, well, God gave us free will. And it's because of our exercise of free will that evil became brought into the world. And for the Jehovah's Witnesses, that's specifically Satan. Satan was a perfect angel, and he decided of his own free will, which is how it's used in the language, right? That he wasn't happy with the way things are, and he decided to challenge God and tempt Adam and Eve and basically start fucking shit up.
Mm-hmm.
So, of his own free will, that he decided that that's what he wanted. Does that make sense?
Yes, perfectly. For the sake of this, I think I will be playing the role of Satan. Now, Satan, for those of you who don't know, is only an evil character in the late parts of the Old Testament and in the New Testament. But traditionally and in traditional Jewish mythology, Satan is a title, Ha-Satan. It just means the adversary. And the adversary is a very important member of God's court. The adversary is there to test God's judgments and God's creations. There are many Satans that appear across many stories. The most famous, of course, and the one that is the basis for a lot of the later satanic mythology, and we will definitely be doing an episode on Satan because I happen to know quite a lot about the character, is the story of Job, right? Job is the man who gets everything taken from him because God has a bet with Satan. But the story in the original Hebrew...
I think that's the only time he actually appears, by name, right?
There are...
The other times it's sort of assumed it's Satan.
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. Slight tangent. If you mean the Satan as in the devil, that is more of an assumed title that is extrapolated from a bunch of other characters. Like the snake is portrayed as being the devil, but the snake in the literary text is a completely separate character.
Yeah. Is the word Satan used in Job? Or is that just translated that way?
Yes, it is you. Well, I mean, it is translated as Satan. Like the word is just printed in the King James Bible as Satan or devil. Gotcha. But the word means adversary, and Satan appears as both Satan and Ha-Satan especially in that book. Ha-Satan appears a lot.
It's one of the same sort of things that happened with angel meant messenger, and then everybody started making up like fan fiction about it.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, yeah. It's a result of translations upon translations upon translations upon translations.
It's important to note that Jehovah's Witnesses are a very new religion. And
Yes.
their take on it is very, not historically accurate. That's not a thing they do.
Mid to late 19th century. My brain is telling me sometime between 1860 and 1880, but I could be kind of off on
They
that.
came out of the Millerites, so yeah, the mid
yeah.
1800s to the late 1800s.
Yeah. We can. This, rest assured, there will be future episodes covering religion.
So many things to talk about.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna sneeze for just a second, so I'm gonna mute myself.
Do it. I dare you. Sneeze online. Let everybody hear you. He shut the mic off of his own free will.
Okay, there we go. My sneezes are very loud. Didn't want to just destroy everyone's eardrums. But I will be playing. That is, by the way, where we get the phrase "devil's advocate." But I will be playing devil's advocate for some of this stuff, and the tangent has made me wander away from my original point about that, which had something to do with. Okay. Right. Remembered. So the solution of God being an omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient being who is all good and all that fun stuff is that we have free will. And free will allows us to do evil. And the most common solution to that, if you can call it a solution that I have seen, this is sort of I would even call it the lay solution, is the ineffability or inscrutability of God. That the consequence of evil as a result of free will is worth the good of free will. This isn't necessarily a proof of free will in and of itself, but it is commonly cited in my experience as the reason why free will exists. That God's reasons are beyond the understanding of man, and that we must simply trust that the good which comes out of the existence of free will is superior to the evil that results from the exercise thereof.
Nice. And there may be other solutions to the problem of evil, but we won't go into those tonight. We're just talking about the free will one.
Yeah.
And it's important that we don't redefine free will. I prepared some stuff to talk about this because the analytic philosophers of the modern day really want to turn philosophy into a science, and they have redefined the word free will. Ironically, the scientists of today are trying to paint philosophers as people only interested in arguing semantics. When you change the definition of the word, you're kind of playing a semantic game. I don't care what word you want to use to describe the scenario that we just talked about as a solution to it. You can call it whatever word you want, make up a new one, but that's the free will I'm talking about. And since that was the first one, if you want to talk about the ability to do whatever you want, call it something else. Call it liberty, call it, I don't know what you want to call it. Anything else but that. That still doesn't leave us with a good definition of what free will is, because it's ill-defined to begin with. But in the context of this solution, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't work. And I have, many years of putting together this argument, which may or may not be valid. It's just something I've convinced myself of, that it doesn't work as a solution to the problem of evil.
Oh, well, certainly we can. Let's dive into it. I know I'm as a fan of epistemology, and since you brought up the issue of definitions, let's try to get a as precise a definition of what it is we are discussing as we can. Does that sound fair?
Sure. I don't know where we're going to go, but we can try.
All right. So, free will is as originally conceived, is the solution to the problem of evil. So free will is the free exercise of action without the control or input of a godhead.
Yeah, there are these rules, and you can choose to break them or not.
Yes.
You can do right or you can do wrong.
Right.
Okay.
Now, that immediately presents some interesting consequences. It implies that there is a set of galactic rules, that there are a super set of rules, and not only that there is a super set of rules, but that these are knowable rules. I know.
Yeah, if you break the rule without knowing it, I don't know how if that's unethical in some way. Right?
Well, I mean that actually has been a huge point of debate. This among Christian theologians since the second or third council of Nicaea. And especially in the Catholic doctrine, my background is Catholic. They solve the problem by inventing this place called limbo, which is where you go if you didn't know that you broke a rule, but you broke it anyway.
Right.
Which is cheating. It's 100% cheating. But
so all I've really got to go with is that Thomas quote that I always do, and the Schopenhauer one.
Yes,
and
pull up.
It doesn't really define free will. It just sort of says why, sort of an anti-definition in some ways, right? You're trying to say that this thing exists that can exist, and so it's hard to define a thing that can't exist, from my perspective. So if you come up with a definition of free will, or better yet, give me an example of a world where there is free will and one where there isn't. And I have a few potential ideas for that we might explore.
Ooh, certainly. A world where there is such a thing as free will.
So imagine, let's just stick with this world. We'll play devil's advocate together. This world, the human world, has free will. Human beings can use their free will to do right or wrong. Okay. Now let's imagine another world in some parallel universe, very similar, but the only people around are AI. Like their creators are gone, like they've all died off, and just the AI are left, and they have programming, and they must follow their programming, and they don't have free will. We're gonna say, what's the difference between the two? So the premise is the human beings do have free will, and the AI do not. I'm not making any judgment against AI. I'm a big AI lover. I'm just saying, let's pretend that there is a difference, and we're gonna start with the humans have free will, and the AI do not. What is functionally the difference between those two worlds? So maybe being able to identify those differences will give us a definition of free will.
Okay.
What can the humans do that the AI cannot?
Well, the AI is, as you said, brought into this environment with a set of programming. So presumably they have a set of rules which they cannot break. That would allow man to do as it pleases, I suppose. But if there are no rules for man to break in the first place, then I'm already self-defeating my conjecture. We
can pretend there are rules. You know?
Sure. Okay.
Pretend there's a god.
We'll pretend there's for mankind there's a god. Sure. Then mankind is,
and the robots have us.
Yeah, the robots have us. Yeah. Mankind is free to break those rules if it finds those rules to be unjust or simply against what it wishes to do, and the robots are unable to do that.
Cool. It's good. It feels solid. Right.
Okay.
As a good definition of free will.
Sure.
And that's what we all want, I think. And if that solved the problem of evil, I'd be okay with it. But it does not. For certain reasons. So let's read those definitions, I think. Let's see where we get into trouble. Thomas Hobbes, the question that... Do you want to do it?
Well, yes, hold on. Let me pull up. Turn that off, and I'll pull up Thomas Hobbes. Here we go. The question is not, therefore is not, whether a man be a free agent, that is to say, whether he can write or forbear, speak or be silent, according to his will, but whether the will to write and the will to forbear come upon him according to his will or according to anything else again in his own power. I acknowledge this liberty, that I can do if I will, but to say that I can if I will, I take to be an absurd speech.
And then Schopenhauer just says it a little more succinctly.
Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills.
So there's an issue of, in my opinion, our programming is chaotic and complex and beyond our own understanding, and not something that we do consciously. You know what I mean? But there is no decision that you make that is not what you want to do, right? In the end, you might desire something, right? You might desire to make choice A, but you fear that choice A will lead to consequences that you do not like, right? And so you take choice B. Or maybe the desire is greater than the fear of the consequences, and so you choose A. But whether or not you have a certain level of fear or whether or not you have a certain level of desire is functionally out of your control. You don't decide whether you want A more than you fear the consequences, and therefore you choose A if true or if not, right?
Yes. I happen to agree with you up on up into that point. Modern. I'm going to say physics is a very broad term, so I apologize for that. But the Einsteinian problem, right? The universal speed limit. Has given us some very interesting consequences. And one of those consequences is that if you aim a spaceship in a certain direction, and you go and pardon me if I butcher the physics. You're the physicist in this. Right,
I was not going to bring physics up, but you did, so it's fair game.
Well, it's important because I ran into this problem when I was, I think, like 10, and it's the problem of you aim a spaceship away from the planet Earth and you send it out, 100 light years, and then you turn it around and you we'll say actually we're going to turn around. We'll make it very simple. A spaceship goes away from the planet Earth at 100 light years near the speed of light. The passengers of that spaceship have now aged at a different rate than the people on the planet. I've got that right?
Yes, it's worse than you're saying, but yes.
Yes, I know it is much worse than I'm saying.
The people on the ship are younger than the people on Earth, and the people on Earth are younger than the people on the ship.
Oh well, if you would turn that ship, could explain it a little bit more so that I don't absolutely butcher
the twin This is the twin paradox. Yes. If anybody wants to look it up. But when the person comes back with the ship, the people who have, there's some really great physics videos on this that I could share with you at some point. That's another whole topic, do relativity. The person who comes back, the person who was on this rocket ship and did some accelerating, though it's not the acceleration that causes this to happen, but the person who did the accelerating will be younger than the person who stayed behind.
Right. Yeah. And so that consequence is that we suddenly have discovered that time is not a constant straight arrow. It is not a thing above dimension, but a dimension in and of itself. And the greater consequence of that is that if you extend the problem out, a million light years, a billion light years, suddenly. You could be looking at something from your present that also exists in your past, and both of those things are occurring simultaneously. And what the implication of that is, and stop me if I get any of this wrong.
Yeah, that's not right.
No. Okay.
What the implication of this is something called there are simultaneity issues. What it means is your past, not the things that happened in your past, but your past might be another observer's future. Somebody else's future might be your present. You cannot say what the present is, and that means the past, present, and future, all the way to the beginning of the universe, all exist in the same way. In whatever way the physical world exists, they have the same existence, which means the future as well already exists. So I think I see that as a great argument against free will, but I wasn't going to bring the physics up at all.
I was going to bring it up because it was learning about that. However incorrectly I might be explaining it. It was learning about that concept that the past, the present, and the future exist in the simultaneous moment when I was a kid that convinced me that there is no such thing as free will.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no, I see.
So there's actually three arguments against it. That's the physical one. I've got a logical one, and then there's the neuroscience one. But I'm not super up on the neuroscience one.
We sort of touched on it briefly a second ago with the question of fear and desire. You do not control that which you fear nor that which you desire. It is the result of years and years and years of exposure in your environment, in your upbringing, and in your genetics.
Supposedly, current experiments show that you have made the decision before you know what decision you've made.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can tell you what you're going to decide before you decide it by looking at the whatever they do with their cat skin, whatever they do. I don't know, but I don't know any of that, so I'm only sitting behind. I'll sit behind Einstein because I understand that one well. But I'm not a big believer in the physical world. I'm an idealist, not a materialist, which is very unusual for a determinist. So I'm not convinced that the physical world is real. Anyway, I'm more interested in the rational rather than the empirical, despite being a science teacher. I apologize. In this particular case, because I'm talking about God and I need to convince myself that their God doesn't exist, I am stuck with, I need the logical one, the rational one, because all that other shit could be explained away by magic. But the logic, if the logic can be explained away by magic, then it doesn't fucking matter what I believe, because it's all madness. Right.
Yeah. So why don't you walk us through that your logical effects?
I gave you the absolutely most succinct one with the fear and desire thing, but the very first post I ever made on Reddit, actually many years ago now, was an essay that I wrote about it, but it was for the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, right? So very much so I'm not like going to read that to you, but I can go through some of the idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've sort of set you up already, right? So let me see if I can find a good point in this. All right. So let's establish a couple of definitions that are temporary. We're just going to use them for the purpose of this discussion. They may not be perfect, right? And they may not fit in every scenario. We're going to call wisdom the ability to foresee the outcome of your actions. So you have a certain level of wisdom. You have a certain ability to see into like the consequential future of the stuff that you do, right? So you have some people are more wise than others, sort of in a way like playing chess, trying to predict the moves of other people, right? You try to predict what are the consequences, how are these dominoes going to fall when you create actions, and nobody's got a perfect ability to say, all right, when I do this, all these things are going to happen. It's very complicated, right? Chaos theory-wise, but you have a certain level. If you don't like that, we can use some other word other than wisdom, but it serves for me temporarily.
Wisdom is fine.
All right. Now let's define selfishness as the willingness to cause suffering or decrease the happiness of somebody else in order to increase your own happiness.
Okay.
That sound good for selfishness?
Sure.
Right? I propose here, this one's not as certain, that different people have different levels are more selfish than others, right? Some people are enjoy making other people happy. Some people do not, right? Some people prefer to make themselves happy. So let's talk about Satan's decision to bring evil into the world for the first time, to disobey God and to screw up this perfect world is what they're trying to tell me. Is what happened, right? This is a very selfish thing to do, right? He foresaw some benefit to himself, I assume, or he wouldn't have done it. So he knew he was going to cause anguish to those, but he chose to do it anyway of his own free will. Right? After careful considerations, his desires were more important than his fears, and this is what he decided to do. This is scenario one. Scenario two is that he didn't know what he was doing was going to fuck shit up, right? But let's talk about scenario one. Two possibilities. Either he knew he was bringing evil into the world or he didn't. So let's start with he knew it was going to bring evil into the world, but he did it for some gain, some benefit. He's allowing, now Adam and Eve are going to die, all their children are going to suffer, war, carnage, all from the Jehovah's Witness point of view. This is what happened. This is what they teach. Okay. So the problem for me is you can't choose to be selfish, right? Choosing to be selfish is itself a selfish act, right? Only a selfish person would choose to act selfishly. even if it were possible to choose to be a selfish person, that would still be a selfish choice, right? You're already selfish when you start making selfish choices. So he didn't make himself selfish. He didn't, of his own free will, become a selfish person. He must have been created that way, or created into a scenario, into a machine that made him that way. So he wasn't the source of the evil. Where was the source of the evil? Like, you got to go back. There's something imperfect about God's creation, and that doesn't jive with what they teach anyway. And what Thomas Aquinas would agree to. That's for sure. All right, scenario 2. Satan's decision was not selfish, simply unwise. He thought his actions would lead to some other outcome that wouldn't be quite so horrible. That he had some grand design in mind for things to be better. If he's correct, I guess everything's fine, but the Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe that, that's for sure. And the problem is let's say he is unwise, he just chose very badly. He didn't choose to be unwise. That itself would be an unwise decision. Like, it would be very unwise I'm gonna be an idiot from now on is an unwise decision.
Right.
So even if it were possible to make that choice, you know what? I'm gonna fucking hit myself in the head and be an idiot from now on. That's an idiotic decision. You're already stupid.
Right.
Like, you're just being redundant at this point, right? Maybe at different levels or whatever, but they claim he was perfect. And if he was perfect, he would not have acted so selfishly or so unwisely. Right? And I've made the same argument for a bunch of other things, a bunch of other qualities like courage and cowardice and a bunch of other juxtapositions that I've lost track of maybe over the years, but they all amount to the same thing. A lot of them default to the unwise, and the other ones default to the selfish. I don't know. That's what I got.
That's what you got.
Show me what you got. That's what I got.
Show me what you got.
Obviously, that's just the nutshell, and I can talk about it till the end of time. But
of course.
And I'm interested in refining it and being wrong about parts of it and making something better of it.
Yeah. And as a definition of or as an example of the logical problem of free will, I think it stands up pretty well. Of course, the issue of free will is tied into the broader issue of the existence of the Godhead as depicted in the major Western religions and some of the Eastern ones as well.
And I'm not the first person to come up with this.
No, of course
Hobbes
not. No.
And all those, it's been so. I've just made up my own special Jehovah's Witness version.
Right. Yeah. And as a matter of principle, I think I happen to agree with the logical, assertion as as I sort of established with my with my butchered physics, and I can't believe I explained it that badly.
No, it's fine.
I'm glad you knew where I was going with it. But like as I sort of explained there, I am convinced of the non-existence of free will as a matter of universal fact. But that doesn't necessarily, I think, answer the question of the perception problem.
Tell me more.
Yeah, so the perception problem goes something like this. I get up in the morning and I have a blue shirt and I have a red shirt. Whether or not I am aware that I am unable to choose doesn't necessarily matter because I have still made a decision in my sleepy morning state. I perceive this as a decision.
You have the freedom to wear whatever shirt you want, and you choose the shirt you want to wear.
Right. And again, whether or not I do in fact have the actual freedom is sort of moot in this problem because I perceive that I do.
Yep. This is called compatibilism. We'll get to that.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And so when when I talk about the problem of free will, and I think where a lot of people get stuck on the problem of free will is the question of choice. Because though our past and our future exist, and though we are an amalgam of every, thought, action, deed, etc. that has been done to us and done by us up till this point, and though logically we cannot choose one or the other, because to choose to be unwise is in itself unwise, and to choose to be selfish is in and of itself selfish. That does not preclude us from the perception that we are doing all of these things, that we are actively choosing to do these things.
I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with compatibilism itself, but it causes an issue, because the people who are using free will, the phrase "we have free will" as an argument again for the problem of evil, and there are lots of those people. They're not the analytic philosophers who are the champions of compatibilism. It's very functional and very scientific and very cool, but then people are allowed to run around and say, I did it of my own free will, and then people are thinking it means this other thing, that it's a solution to this problem of evil. And so this is where we got to get into Newton's laser sword.
Oh, yes. Yes, I love and I apologize that the text on this is small, but I hope it comes up okay.
Must be the way I just took it from like Wikipedia anyway. Wikipedia, the kids can go.
I snipped it from Wikipedia too. If you just Google Newton's laser sword, a philosopher will come up named I've forgotten his first name already, but his last name is Alder, and he proposes this problem. It addresses, to read the specific starting Wikipedia, it's a philosophical razor devised by Alder and discussed in an essay in June 2004, addressing the differing views of scientists and philosophers in epistemology and knowledge. Epistemology, for those who don't know, is the philosophy of words and
what we can know.
Yeah,
and how we know things.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of epistemology. And his principle is summarized as follows. In its weakest form, it says that we should not dispute propositions unless they can be shown by precise logic and or mathematics to have observable consequences. In its strongest form, it demands a list of observable consequences and a formal demonstration that they are indeed consequences of the proposition claimed.
And I'm going to explain to you the consequences that it has.
Absolutely.
This difference, okay? For me personally, but I'm not the only person in the world in a situation like mine, or the situation I was in, okay? So the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that if you don't obey some very strict rules, God is going to come back very soon, within the next, so I'm 20 years old when this happened, within the next couple of years. God is going to come to earth and kill me for not obeying. Okay? So this is literally life or death. So how's that for observable consequences? But so then I should just stay and pretend that I still believe, right? Because otherwise I'll die. Like, I forget what that is. That's somebody else's razor. But
I have an example that I can go into.
Yeah. But for me, I was miserable. Like, suicidally miserable. As a teenager, because I was alone in the world and couldn't do anything about it, right? So I had to leave in order to have a happy life. So this is a difference between happy life and potential death. And so without convincing myself that they were wrong, I would still be there and have had a miserable life rather than a very happy life that I have had having left. And God didn't come, so I'd have screwed up big time. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, it does matter, and the definition of the word matters. And if the compatibilists want to take free will, I guess that's fine. I kind of feel cheated, but I'll have to make up another one. But nobody else is using that other one when they talk about this. If you go right now, people all over the internet, all over YouTube, and are talking about the problem of evil, those who believe in God and that God is good will always come to free will. It's not good enough. Ooh, I got passionate there. I apologize.
Of course, I love the passion. I love it. And you know that is the functional problem of any discussion about free will, is that it is an inelegant solution to an inelegant problem derived from an inelegant solution.
And I'm happy for you that in your life it functionally matters nothing, because it's still making me miserable in some small way, even 30 years later almost, right? Like, I have to reconvince myself continually. That's okay for you, but not for me.
Oh, I mean, I'm very much like with you on that. You know, my my own disassociation from religion was far less dramatic than yours, and more just like a slow, logical series of conclusions over.
And the Catholics are cooler with dissent in quite a few ways, anyways.
Yeah, I mean. Yeah. You know, a lot of the classical scholars of the free will problem were Catholics for that. You know,
and not quite so oppressive.
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
it's good.
You know, but the issue of compatibility, and can you define that recently? Because I never heard that term before. You
compatibilism is what
compatibilism.
It is. Yeah. So that's if you go to the Wikipedia page, you'll get that if you spell it right. Excuse me. Compatibilism. Compatibilism. Lots of I's, no E's. So I will read it for you. Compatibilism is the belief that free will and determinism are mutually compatible, and it is possible to believe both without being logically inconsistent. Compatibilists believe freedom can be present or absent in situations for reasons that have nothing to do with metaphysics. They say causal determinism does not exclude the truth of possible future outcomes. And it gets deeper than that. It goes way back too. I didn't realize like the compatibilism was championed first by the ancient Stoics. Like really? I didn't know that. Had no idea. But Thomas Aquinas obviously latched right onto that. So.
And I wouldn't say that I'm 1,000% on the compatible track. I'm certainly adjacent to it.
Yeah, I think there's more than one compatibilism, and I think there's a lot of variations, and we would have to study them more in depth than I have.
It would be a class all on its own.
There's even a link down below that says semi-compatibilism. Great.
You know, I raise the perception problem. The perception problem will always exist because of, you know, no matter how much you can prove that there is no objective choice, and I happen to agree with you, and that there isn't.
The illusion of free will is just as good as the real thing.
Yes, yeah.
That's what you're trying to say, and I don't disagree with you. In a normal human context.
Yes, yeah. In an everyday human context, it's very simple. But from the problem of evil, and I'm going to bring that back up again, because when we say the problem of evil, it's not just specifically about evil.
Does evil exist?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Why does God allow evil?
Yes,
to exist? Yeah.
You know, it's a more sort of
It's not like saying, "Oh man, evil's a problem. We need to combat that." No.
Right.
Evil poses a problem to a logical explanation that a logical proof that God exists.
Yeah. You know, and as a it is,
and not even God, like their God.
Yeah.
I'm willing to accept, it's not a great thing, that there is a God. He just happens to be kind of an ass, right? And doesn't give a shit, and is tormenting us for, maybe it's even for a good purpose, but it's not their God.
Well, but that's the ineffability problem. Like, if the purpose is good on some objective metric, it's not one that we can understand, and so it's also kind of moot. Like,
and if the Jehovah's Witnesses taught that, I'd be cool, but they don't.
Yeah, well, but that is always the issue with any kind of Godhead, is that no one wants to imagine a Godhead that isn't all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good, because especially the all-good problem. Because if your Godhead... Go ahead.
Sorry. This will lead us into part 2 very nicely, because this is why I went insane. But that's for a later discussion. Yeah.
I mean, everyone wants the Godhead to be good, because if your Godhead isn't good, then you have no reason to worship apart from fear, and no one wants to worship out of fear in 2020. To be clear, there have been religions in the past that worship out of fear. The Aztecs, most famously, in the Americas, the Aztec religion would require you to sacrifice people every day so that the sun would come up and they wouldn't kill you. Yeah. I mean,
the Jehovah's Witnesses have a funny take on that. They're like, God wants you to love him, not because you're afraid of him, because you actually love him. But if you don't love him, he's going to kill you. Like, wait, what?
Right.
Oh, okay.
And
Shit.
Well, and that is always sort of the quiet truth of, in my experience of Judeo-Christian faiths, is that even if it's, and I'm going to just refer to the monotheistic faiths in general,
They still call that free will. Free will at gunpoint. Sorry.
Yeah, free will at gunpoint. Like if someone holds a gun to your head and says, you must do X or I am going to shoot you, you don't really have, I guess you do kind of have a choice, but the other choice is death.
Yeah.
Like if your choices are life or death, you're probably going to pick life.
Cake.
Now,
Cake or death.
Right, and now to be clear, there's I think there is a valid discussion to be had on whether or not existence is inherently superior to non-existence. But
not
that
in 2020, but normally.
Yeah, this year notwithstanding. But it's sort of moot when you're talking about a benevolent being. Like a benevolent being wouldn't force you to make that kind of choice.
If I can think of a better scenario than what we're living in, then how can this God be so clever? That confused me most. Like, if I were in charge, I wouldn't let all this shit go down. Like viruses, why would they exist at all? In terms of our purpose, like what no. And mosquitoes, nah. Bats will eat something else. I'll make something else that doesn't drink blood, or only eats flowers. I don't know.
But don't you understand? You, a mere mortal, can't understand the inscrutability, ineffability of the Godhead. Why, you can't.
Well, I don't
make
have
that
to
decision.
Like it. That may be true, but I don't have to like it.
Well, sure, you certainly don't have to like it,
and I don't have to worship it either.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, that is sort of the. What I have found to be the logical conclusion of that problem, of the big traits, omniscience, omnibenevolence, and omnipotence. If the Godhead is omniscient and omnipotent, but not omnibenevolent, then the God is evil, and you shouldn't worship evil because evil. If the God is omniscient and omnibenevolent, but not omnipotent, then they can't do anything for you, and so you probably shouldn't worship them because they can't do anything for you. And if the Godhead is omnipotent and omnibenevolent, but not omniscient, then they're probably not going to be able to help you because they're not aware of your problem. Yeah. And so again,
they just don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, they just don't know what they're doing. Yeah. So in any of those issues, then there is no point to worship because it's not going to lead you to anything. And ultimately, the problem of evil is, and the consequence of free will, capital F, capital W, is the desire for faith. I believe it was Augustine who wrote Faith-Seeking Understanding. I'm gonna double check that real quick, so I'm not just saying shit out my ass. But
he was certainly invested in taking Plato's teachings and really aligning Christianity to it so that it made some logical sense. Nobody else cared about the logic before him, but he foresaw that people need to have a logical reason to believe stuff.
Not Augustine of Hippo, Saint Anselm. Anselm. I get them confused because they're both A.
Sounds right to me.
Anselm was a big Aristotelian, and he wrote this very long treatise on faith seeking understanding, which is a series of proofs, quote unquote proofs, that in his words create a logical path to the existence of the omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent God. And in my experience, that is why free will, again, capital F, capital W, exists. Because it stems from a predetermined conclusion, faith, attempting to rationalize itself against irrational odds, the real world. And I have sympathy for that. I'm very sympathetic to that problem. is in a world, especially in the modern world, as chaotic as it is, you want to feel like there is something up there that is making decisions that are going to work out. And so you will cling to a definition, however crude as free will, capital F, capital W, is, because it makes sense of something that feels deeply illogical and wrong.
Hope in the face of something
Yes, yeah.
scary as death.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I was there.
Right, and it is not, I think, totally irrational.
I'm getting old now, so I feel the tug. I don't feel the tug towards the Jehovah's Witnesses specifically, but I feel a tug towards wanting to believe there's some point that everything I am isn't going to just disappear. Like there'll at least be some record of it, which is why this podcast is cool, because maybe some archaeologists, like the AI that we leave behind, will find it someday and find it interesting. So.
I have a deep-seated determination to carve something out of marble and bury it in my backyard.
Nice.
And my fondest wish is that when I have finally constructed my marble pyramid tomb, I will have written the entirety of the original Star Wars trilogy out in at least 6 languages, and that will be buried with me.
Thinking about that AI example made me think of a story that I might put together or think about where the AI, like, because they're programmed to protect us even though we're gone after a certain amount of time, like invent time travel and then save us all sort of from death.
Oh, well, I mean, that was the premise of your time travel class, is that you were an AI who'd come back in time to prepare us to be perpetually taken care of. Now, what I really loved about that example is that the scary logical conclusion is that you would be forced to stay alive and happy even if you did not otherwise wish to be so.
Guess what? Every utopia is actually a dystopia. Ha!
we fooled ya.
Sucker. And so that would be the point of the main character, would be like, this is fucked up. What am I gonna do? Yeah.
I mean, I certainly hope you write it, because I do find it to be a terrifying and interesting sort of like the Twilight Zone Black Mirror style of narrative.
Quit my job and write full time. Lose my house and become homeless. Oh, sorry.
you could be just like Diogenes? He's the one who lived in a barrel.
Give me a big old barrel.
Yeah, he lived in a barrel. He peed on Augustus. Not Augustus, Alexander. He peed on Alexander.
Alexander the Great.
Yeah, Alexander the Great came by and said, I wish to be a Diogenes. And Diogenes said, well, I also wish to be Diogenes.
That's something for maybe a future episode. I'd like to talk about the philosophy of the early Eleans. They've got some cool stuff that has kind of come back around, having to do with things that are continuous and discrete. But sorry, total.
No, that's
sideshow.
No, that's good.
Part 3.
Thinking of future parts is excellent. I love to hear it.
Part 3, is the universe continuous or discrete?
So I am sort of satisfied with your definitions and satisfied in your understanding of what it is you mean when you say that free will doesn't exist, and why it is important to you that is a true proposition. And again, I've oversimplified it for the sake of the statement.
In a friendly way, I'd like to ask you a favor, that you keep your eye out in your travels, in your life, for things that cause serious problems to my thoughts. That because I don't want to pretend that I'm right when there's something out there to show me that I'm wrong. So just keep your eye out for me.
Oh, well, sure, of course. I always attempt to try to refute my own thinking to double check my logic. It's double checking your math, right?
Yeah.
Like whenever you do a math problem. The biggest problem whenever discussing the existence or non-existence of the problem of evil as it relates to again, free will, capital F, capital W, is the ineffability issue. That there is something which is superior to our understanding that we just don't understand, and that we cannot possibly understand.
Now the question is, should we be taking instructions from such a being, and then how do we decide what those instructions are?
Well, yes.
Doesn't seem to be the case. not in any clear way, not in any way that we have any sort of consensus on as a race. Right.
We will definitely be doing. I'm not gonna even say on episode. There'll be a couple episodes discussing religion at large. It's a topic I'm very familiar with and can talk about as much as you can talk philosophy.
Is that Ricky Gervais is like, yeah, your God exists, but those 2,599 don't.
Now, I do wanna try to give you some hope about, as you said, as you're aging, you want to believe that there's some point to this, and there's some after. Another faith came around a little bit before the Jehovah's Witnesses, but in that sort of same American revivalist movement. They are known as the Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in the Book of Mormon, in the most orthodox of Mormon faiths,
I did try to read that book actually, but it's another story.
It's interesting.
It didn't have sentences I could cohere, but yeah.
It's quite goofy. But what's great about it is that it proposes the following. If the Mormons are correct, then as long as you live at least a semi-moral life, you are going to have some sort of positive afterlife. And when they say moral, that doesn't necessarily even include a belief in God. It just requires you to not be a dick. And I am oversimplifying this again, because I'm not trying to go
Other than my lack of humility, I think I qualify. I feel good about that.
I'm trying not to go into it for the 2-3 hour lecture that it really deserves, because their mythology is quite fascinating.
To be upfront here, you don't believe it's correct, though.
No.
Oh, okay, all right. You guys scared me for a moment.
No.
I was ready for an intervention.
In everything you've known about me, do you?
No. That's why I was very confused.
No. But I find it fascinating because of this following problem, right? As long as you're not really just a horrible human being, and it sort of comes back to a basic don't lie, don't steal, don't be rude and cheat on your wife. Some basic shit. You'll get a positive afterlife, and so that. And it also includes redemption. Like you can have done shitty things and then redeemed yourself as your life goes on, and you'll end up somewhere positive. And then the more you subscribe to the Mormon faith, and the more you subscribe to their belief system, and do all these crazy rituals and things, like the better and better and better your heavens you get, until eventually you get your own planet and you get to be a god.
Nice.
It's a wild faith.
I'd be a sweet god. What if you're not? What if you're bad? Do you get a chance to learn?
I believe.
Or you get punishment forever.
I'm not
because the Jehovah's Witnesses don't have a hell. They just God kills you. But I was still not down with that, because you don't teach a child not to touch a hot stove by letting them touch the hot stove.
Right.
That's not how you teach somebody. Their God is just a terrible teacher.
I am under the impression that there is some sort of corrective state, you really
detention. Saturday detention.
You really only get hell if you're the lowest of the low, as far as I'm aware. Like Hitler gets hell, right?
Right on.
But I think you really got.
You can't even sell a religion where Hitler doesn't get hell.
Yeah.
You gotta fly with that.
Yeah,
whether it's true or not, that's God's problem, not yours.
Right, exactly. But the general thing thing about the Mormons is that as long as you're not absolutely fucking despicable, and I believe there are provisions included for ignorance or for status.
Great mental illness.
Yeah.
Maybe?
It's primitive 1850s versions of that, but it's still there.
The Jehovah's Witnesses are gonna God's gonna come back, and if you're a baby and your parents aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, God's gonna kill you. So he's not nearly as nice as the Mormons.
Well, that's why the Mormons are all super nice, man. They've got that really nice. But here's the thing about it, right?
I learned that much from South Park. Yeah.
So, let's say conservative estimate, there have been 10,000 faiths on this planet. To be clear, there's been more than that. But conservatively, let's say 10,000 for the sake of this example. You have a 1 in 10,000 chance of being correct, or else you will be punished for all eternity, so say the vast majority of them. There are some exceptions to this, and especially in the older pagan faiths, there tend to be exceptions to this. But certainly for the modern monotheistic faiths, you're probably going to go to some version of hell.
Speaking of that, of the modern monotheistic faiths, the Mormons are the only ones that don't believe the universe has a beginning.
Yeah.
That's a cool thing to talk about sometime.
They are. I do want to. We'll do an episode on the Mormons because there's a lot to talk about with the Mormons. They're the original Scientology. But
the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons actually came from the Millerites.
Yes,
so we should talk about Miller at some time, maybe with that, because Miller was this first, like, the end is near sort of guy, and then all kinds of religions sprang out of that. The Seventh-day Adventists, which gave birth to Jehovah's Witnesses. There's a whole tree that comes from this Miller dude. So he's a fascinating figure.
American Christian revitalization of the 19th century is a bizarre period of our history that we just don't talk about enough.
It was a bizarre time in upstate New York for some reason. Like, people were just into some weird ass shit.
Just getting into. I mean, there's a lot we talk about there, but so
I think the whole Puritan thing just kind of like it fucked them up, and they didn't know how to like deal with it, and all kinds of things came out of it. Yeah.
I mean, we have the word puritanical for a reason, like, but so the Mormon faith proposes that you are probably going to end up in a good place. And of those 10,000 faiths, right, you had really a 1 in 10,000 chance of getting it right and getting like a good afterlife. Those are not good odds. But then the Mormons came along and said, hey man, you don't have to get it right. You just have to not really suck. So what the Mormons did was double your odds of being correct.
I think the Catholics are in that zone too, aren't they? Like,
no.
Do I go to hell for what? Not being baptized?
You used to. More recently, they've changed their tone on that, but it's very recent and it's very controversial.
Maybe they're competing with the Mormons. Yeah.
I mean, the thing about the Catholic Church is that the Catholic Church is very slow to change. You know, they are the Christian faith that really gets into reason and philosophy a lot. They're really into that shit. But they're also in the faith-seeking understanding crowd. Like, they start with the conclusion and then try to find the answer. And so they're very slow to adopt any kind of change.
I was just introduced to that phrase this year, conclusion shopping. I really like
conclusion shopping,
A lot of people do it.
Yeah, a lot of people do it, yeah. And, you know, it's...
Just to be avoided if it can be.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you should always hope that you are starting with an answer and trying to find the conclusion that both that meets the answer to its fullest potential. We all do a bit of conclusion shopping every now and then. It's sort of inevitable.
I actually thought we would get into that some with the free will thing. Is you don't really choose what you believe.
It had crossed my mind, but that is belief, I think, is an episode unto itself. And as we've sort of been talking, I've realized how many topics sort of dovetail from the initial problem of evil. So I think
good.
I'm gonna
let's party.
What's crazy is that like intellectually I knew that, but I hadn't really thought about it until we started talking, and I went, "Oh,
because we're talking philosophy."
Yeah,
God knows there's plenty of cool topics
there's so much to talk about. So I you know, there's I'm already making mental notes of things that we're gonna cover on later things.
Well, I am making physical notes. So
I'm glad someone in my circle. I'm glad I know people who take physical notes, because I don't. It is a problem. For the most part, it works out for me okay, but every once in a while, I'll be sitting there and I'll be like, shit, I gave that NPC a random name. I hope Sydney has written it down, because I can't fucking remember what I called them.
The good thing is you have this never-ending supply of cool ideas, so if you lose a few, it's not a big deal. It's not like you're running around, but
there's always something new that I can spit out on the other side of it. But yeah, I'm glad that I'm glad that this worked out, and that my Wi-Fi issues notwithstanding, it's largely settled down for the rest of the for the rest of the hour.
Would it be okay?
Yeah.
If I posted a link to this in the Ex-Jehovah's Witness subreddit?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I think there are some people who would dig it.
Absolutely. The more people, the merrier. And just to remind you guys, and remind you that you're still on the White Pages podcast, and we are Guerrilla Marketing. Remember that this is the revolution. You fund the revolution, so you'll see a donate button down below. Make sure
there are a bunch of ex-Mormons who hang out at our site too. We get along very well, and so they'll be fascinated.
I love talking to ex-Mormons about it. And most of what I know about Mormonism comes from knowing ex-Mormons, and also like just knowing Mormons. Like I worked with a fairly devout Mormon. last year, and they were so happy and willing to just talk about that stuff.
Nice.
And I've found that with a lot of Mormons, that they're very comfortable just talking to you about faith. Like they, you know, I mean, everyone knows that. That's the classic joke, right? You're out and about, the Mormons accost you. You know, and I like discussing these topics, especially topics of religion. That is far and away my I was gonna say my genre, but genre is the wrong word. My I don't want to say area of expertise because I have no formal training in it, but it's a
area of fascination.
Area of fascination. Let's go with that. Yeah, it is my area of fascination above and away everything else. Like, you know, I question these things because, you know, because of my Catholic background, which was thankfully far less traumatic than yours. You know, though the problem of evil came up to me almost immediately, and you know, when I was. I have to say believer because I have memories and I have a written testimony of belief, but it wasn't nearly, it was never really Catholic, you know, like it was Christian light at best. But you know, I hit the problem of evil very, very early. And my solution for, I think till I was about 14 or 15, was that, that God is omnibenevolent and omniscient, but not omnipotent. That God was actually powerless, because that was the only thing that made sense. And I at the time do
you know Spinoza?
I do not.
Spinoza believes that we are in the mind of God. It's where we exist. So if God made itself only this, then it would be powerless, right?
I mean, that's fair.
Pantheism versus panentheism.
Yes.
There's more than the universe.
Yeah.
To God or not.
Now, I will say, I'm big on the very swift definitions tonight, but and swift summaries. But my quick swift summary to the question of the existence of God is. The point is sort of moot because there is no tangible effect.
Newton's flaming laser sword.
Yes, yeah, well, it is 1,000% Newton's flaming laser sword. I love that when you pull that back up. I knew
you would love it.
Oh yeah, I love it when you say
Star Wars
because
it's Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean it's Star Wars, but it's also just a thing that I have thought for a very long time. Like, you know, the lack of physical evidence is evidence in and of itself, and so it's not really worth discussing. Not that it's not worth discussing for the entertainment of it. But it is a moot point ultimately. But
right on. Is that it for us?
I think we're coming in on the top of the hour, plus a little bit extra on the start of the show, because of technical hiccups here and there. I think this was a roaring success, and I think I like to think we've discussed the problem of evil as succinctly and efficiently as possible, and hopefully proved to some of you that there is no such thing as free will, and that's okay.
Or at least it's worth thinking about some more.
I always advocate that it is worth examining your beliefs at least once a year to see what new information you might have come across to determine whether or not you are wrong.
Problem is, as you get older, it takes longer and longer to do that.
Well, yes.
It's taking up the whole year eventually.
And I really went into this curious to see what, like, you know, like I said, I wanted to see your reasons for the denial of free will. And later, you know, as we sort of discussed, I discovered that when you say free will, you mean capital F, capital W, probably evil free will, which is a different thing than just it's different than the perception problem. And for me, that has always been my sticking point when you have said that there is no free will, is that the perception problem exists. But that's free will, little f, little w. The perception of choice is not the same thing as the evil that results from the Godhead. And we will definitely be furthering that discussion. And I'm curious about this moment where you went crazy, but we'll get into that next time, I think.
Well, it's more like 4 months, but yeah, let's do it.
We'll definitely get into the 4 months where you went crazy, because I do want to talk more about the perception question and how that relates to the mundane question of evil, not the problem of evil, but the mundane question of people doing bad and good things.
And what's practically to be done about that?
Yes, yeah. But that will be us for this evening. Make sure you check back tomorrow for our regular White Pages podcast. It's our 10th episode. It's going to be a good one. We did get one of our longtime regular viewers to send us in one of their bad scripts, so hopefully that'll be entertaining. And we will be discussing reactionary media in video games and film tomorrow. So hopefully you guys will tune in for that at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can always check us out here on Twitch live Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Like us on Facebook at the White Pages Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at pages_podcast. That's where we post most of our announcements and other content. And of course, if you are just tuning in now, or you're tuning in late, or you want to listen to again, you want to avoid all the technical glitches that do tend to come up with these things, we do have a YouTube channel where we post the VODs either the day after or the day after that, and that is youtube.com/the White Pages Podcast. Thank you all for tuning into this first episode of Plan Talk, and we will see you in the next one.